am so excited to be talking to you about this incredible film and talking to you too as a very successful Black woman documentary filmmaker. And that's exciting. You know, Boston's a huge doc town, as you know, and it's so important to have people that look like us as well, being able to tell these incredible stories. I mean, you are a Peabody Award winner, an Emmy Award winner, an NAACP Image Award winner, and you know, I think that your projects are so important for our for the diaspora, for bringing forth these stories. So, Jamila Wignot, Ailey documentarian, researcher, welcome. I just want to start with this sort of like an overall question about what brought you to this incredible project and why is it so important to you?
Thank you. Before I leap into answering that, I want to just give a shout out to Boston because it is where I got my start. My first research job was as an archivist at WGBH, and one of my first internships was actually at the beloved and amazing, incredible, inspiring Blacksite Inc. So I have both of those formidable institutions to thank for the very fact that I'm here. So very grateful to be back in Boston with this film.
Virtually. We give out a Henry Hampton Award for excellence in documentary filmmaking because I don't want Henry Hampton's name to be lost. I want it to be continually every year to be understood who he was.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that you're doing that work. It's so important to remember him, such a trailblazer in his own right. So actually, this film came to me. It wasn't a film that I, sort of had been dreaming about or developing. Stephen Ives and Amanda Pollock, who are principals at Insignia Films and who I know through our work in public media, we knew of each other and, we had a lunch one day and they just pitched me on this idea of, we want to EP a film about Alvin Ailey and we're looking for directors whose work we love and, would you be interested? And it was just like, I had to like play it cool, but on the inside, it's like, would I be interested? Just, such an amazing thing to kind of land in my lap as a possibility. And Ailey is a company that I actually saw for the first time in college in Boston. The Black Student Union on my campus got free tickets. And so I went down not knowing anything about the company to the Lang Center, and there, my mind and spirit and body were just blown by this just incredibly beautiful, powerful, kind of really emotional, visceral journey that I think you witness of a people when you go and you see the Ailey Company for the first time, and that feeling, never left me, and I remained a huge fan. So for me, initially, the importance of doing this film was just to spend time with that extraordinary dance work, to have an opportunity to make a film that, had so much movement and flow. And I thought there was a chance for me to stretch as a filmmaker as well. But like many people, I really wasn't familiar with Mr. Ailey's personal life story. And so once I dug into that research, a kind of whole new yearning and desire to realize his story as an artist, really manifest itself for me. And I really saw it as having an opportunity to go on a journey with somebody from their early age, somebody who was alive and open to the world, but also somebody who is really on the search, who is trying to find out, who he was, what he cared about, his voice, and, ultimately discovering dance as the art form that would allow him to express himself in ways that he wanted. So for all those reasons, it's a really meaningful film. And for me as an artist, I really love making films about artists because I just get to, sit in this one. I got to kind of sit with a mentor, somebody who I think really opened doors and paved the way for, all sorts of Black artists in particular, but artists, you know, and is a real model in some ways of what it means to kind of think about your voice and your community and where you come from and the stories that you want to tell.
That is so, you know, it so comes across in this film, all of that work that was done and the conversations that you had. And, you know, sort of the passion of not only you as a filmmaker, your team, but also the passion of Ailey and the people that are still presenting his work. So you started, as you said, in this career as an archivist and a researcher. So I just would love for you to talk a little bit about the importance that research plays in a film storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really owe a lot of the credit to my practice to WGBH and starting there at the Media Library. That was my first job out of college, doing archival research for, you know, other filmmakers who were making films for the various PBS strands, and then very specifically for their historical strand, American Experience. And I think that, you know, there is a very kind of rigorous sort of scholarship practice that we were steeped in there, and in sort of coming to these stories, really delving into the history and trying to find, you know, artful ways of translating that history to film. And then for archive, you know, just really having the gift of spending time with Extraordinary Archive and thinking about like what images mean and how we can use them, both to showcase the lives of people in literal ways, like having a literal archive of the subject or the story, but also thinking about ways to kind of use the archive more broadly to create a world. And I think for this film, though, there is a bit of a departure for me. It's a very subjective telling. I'm using archive in a very impressionistic way. I was, you know, aware of Mr. Ailey's life story, but as an individual who, you know, was born in the 1930s, who came from an extremely working class, working poor background. He's not somebody whose, you know, mother was out there with like a little, you know, handheld home movie camera documenting his every, you know, move. But in doing the reading and the research and in listening to his own words, there was a sense of a kind of point of view and a way that he saw the world. And so for me, I was thinking about, well, how can I harness the archive to be more than something representational? How can I move towards a kind of impressionistic experience? How can I say, okay, this isn't literally the Texas of Ailey's youth, but there are textures or there are qualities to this image that make you feel like you're set in the world that he experienced, and certainly the world that then informs his art. For him, you know, he talks about this idea of blood memories, and his work being informed by something called blood memories, which means it's not just his specific experience, but it's the experience of the ancestors, the diaspora. And that really became something that I think became an opening for us, that we said, okay, well, we have the liberty then through this notion of blood memories, and knowing that we were also going to be showcasing a contemporary dance work that was inspired by him. I think we had a little bit more latitude and flexibility to play. And that was really, really exciting, because it meant that we weren't locked into, oh, there are no literal moving images of the Dewdrop Inn, the juke joint that, you know, informs Blue Suite, or there's no image of there's not enough image of his specific church that he attended in any number of the cities that he went to. There is that material, but it didn't translate, it didn't visually mirror the kind of poetry of his spoken memories. And so I think it was very exciting to think about wanting to create a kind of immersive and sensorial visual experience that mapped the way that Mr. Ailey talked about his life, and then the way he translated that life to dance. So it was a real stretch, actually. And I think some of my colleagues at WGBH might say, you know, some people might argue it's a leap too far in terms of how one uses the archive, but it felt appropriate to him and his vision and the kind of total experience we were trying to create with the film.
And I think that completely comes across. I mean, I didn't think that you know, that it was wrong in a sense. That I felt like you created that story with that footage, which we'll talk about in a minute, how that footage came about. But and to be able to create that texture and the character of a place that really brought out who Ailey was and what influenced his life. And yeah, I mean, and I think that as we're trying to weave together stories like this, where, you know, we didn't necessarily as Black people document our lives in a way that others' lives were documented. So to be able to take the liberty to use some of these images that you found to create that and weave that story from childhood to the end of his life, I think was really brilliant. And it really gives a really great sense of story. So can we talk a little bit about that as a documentarian, as a researcher about and doing work around the diaspora and Black life? How do you find these images when they're so difficult to find and we didn't we didn't really document them?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about this kind of in a comparative way to, you know, I worked on African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross, the 6-part series about the 500-year history of Africans and African Americans, you know, in North America, hosted by Dr. Gates. And episode 6 was the contemporary hour. And as we were trying to find images, so that film was made in 2013, I think broadcast in 2014, if I'm not getting my dates wrong. And it was a real challenge to find. I remember that time we were just looking for everyday ordinary life. Now this was like 68 to present day, right? So even that everyday ordinary depictions of life in the 70s was like a real struggle, so much so that actually my co-producer, we had to use some of her family's home movies to show kind of Black middle class life in particular. There was so much documentation of negative aspects, you know, news footage really, of this kind of like crisis documentation. And I just remember at that time, all of us just being like, oh man, why is this such a challenge? And in fact, another film that I worked on too, we similarly had to use the producer's own home movie footage. I'm remembering that now. Great director out of Boston.
Because all of that other footage was.
Yeah, so I think truly in the last 10 years, not only has there been a real effort by archives to gather these materials, I think there's also was an effort to preserve and make publicly accessible a lot of these materials. And in a way that, you know, especially since we were making this film during COVID, there was no way for us to like go into the archive and look through the reels on a, you know, Steam Deck or something and have them, you know, transfer footage over. Everything we actually found was either digitized, or we could talk to somebody and ask them, oh, do you have more in your collection? They could get it to us digitally. And so I just think there's just been a real effort by people to recognize the worth of their personal collections, and then institutions gathering that material and making it accessible. And I can name a few. I mean, MoMA has a really incredible collection of just home movie footage and kind of, you know, sort of orphan film style materials that they've found. The Texas, the Archive of Moving Image, Texas Archive of Moving Image has a lot of that kind of early rural stuff that we were able to gather. The National Museum of African American History and Culture, massive efforts there. The Chicago Film Archives is another one that just had a lot of home movie collections. And then again, for sort of early years material, we also discovered through actually an Instagram account that I follow, Black Archives, which I recommend everybody following because it's just a site of Black joy. It's extraordinary. And they had started to post images of a collection at Duke of an sort of amateur filmmaker named H. Lee Waters, who was going around to various towns in North Carolina and documenting Black and white rural life. And that just had this, you know, so a lot of the images of sort of smiling children and smiling women. And those are really interesting because he was a white filmmaker, and sometimes the gaze was off.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so there were, and
Interesting. Yeah.
sometimes, or he was asking people to perform in ways that you had, it was like, oh, this is a little bit odd. But there were other times where people were subverting the gaze. I think very much there's a very slow panning shot of two women on a porch that we used during Cry. And he just goes across this porch, and the last two girls they're very like, I see you looking at me, and I know I have power. I don't know. There's just something about the way they look into the camera that felt very powerful. So we were also making choices like that, not just, there are tricky things to navigate in terms of what's the point of view of whoever was documenting Black life. So we, early on with my editor, we were picking out things, and particularly sort of like, ethnographic, or even some of the like WPA filmmakers who were going out and documenting rural Black life. It just felt like the perspective was so skewed, and it had a kind of like sociological interest in showing a kind of, a sort of impoverishment, and,
because
people
that's
who are
what people
poor
were,
and things. Right.
and that's what people thought of. But you also had footage from Zora Neale Hurston, was it?
Yes, yes. So it's the women, and that is gorgeous. And I think that's the kind of footage which that collection is at the Library of Congress, I believe. And also Catherine Denham's collection of works. There's a few ethnographic films that she did that we picked from her travels to the islands, that we just thought there was a kind of dance quality in them that we really loved. And so for both of those, it's a really interesting thing to think about what they filmed, and a kind of like luxuriousness of what they filmed. So the woman who's like reclined on the porch, she's just completely laying sideways, and another woman sort of tapping her toe, and the woman who kind of walks straight to camera, a trust that's very evident. Like, it just feels totally different, and it's clear that they trust the person behind the camera so much. And so you just get both a different kind of image, like, oh, women reclining on a porch on a Sunday, just a very everyday life kind of thing. That's something that's beautiful and relaxed. And so that was extraordinary.
And as a viewer, you don't, it's sort of like it washes over you, right? It's sort of like this sense of familiarity is really what I felt in this film, that I know those people. I feel really warm about this, which translates into the feeling, the warmth of Ailey. You raised such a good point, and that is that, we hold on to things, like we may have done family photos and we may have done family films, but they're important for people like yourself who are making movies, because we can't necessarily find that Black joy in footage elsewhere. I think it was the MoMA who did an exhibit on those photographs, which was really wonderful, because it's like, wait, I have these in my basement. So how do we like say that we have this for people like you, so that, it's like, how do we know that you're making a documentary about something and that you could use some footage? Is there a space or a place that we could say, here's some home movies from Boston in the 1960s or something like that?
You mean, is there literally an archive that's sort of specializing
in that we would
right
say
now?
that I could put in there, or that I could put in there and say, I have home movie footage if anyone needs it, if they're doing a documentary about Black life in Boston in the 1940s. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we should probably create something like that, because I don't think there's anything that's that sort of functional right now. But I do think finding ways to partner with organizations that, I feel like there's a possibility of maybe getting in touch with, say, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I have this collection of archive, of my family life. Is there a way that you can host it? I can retain the right to it, thinking about ways of maintaining it, your ownership stake over it, but also some way of allowing it to exist in the world. And I again, Black Archives, I think, has done such an extraordinary.
And that might be the place to start.
Yeah, to contact
to do
them.
All right. So having gone through all that footage and filming this, and I heard you went from backwards to forward. So you started filming the current situation now, it was happening in the dance company now, and then went back, which gave Butch Build Trust. But I want to know if, because there's so much richness in this film, what was there an aha moment? Like oftentimes with a filmmaker, you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's exactly the soundbite I wanted, or the image that is going to like wrap this whole thing together. Was that there for you, or what was that? I'm sure it was, but what was that for you in this film?
Yeah, I mean, well, sort of the idea of blood memories, which I've heard that phrase before. I was familiar enough with the Ailey Company or reading kind of press releases to know about it, but hearing him say it, and then there is really something, he just has this beautiful voice, and spending time with his voice and thinking about like, wow, listen to the texture in this voice. I mean, that little moment we have where he actually sings the spiritual, I mean, when we hit that, we were like, what? And so I think for us, it was hearing his voice and thinking about like the poetry in it and how could we push for something very poetic. I should say, you know, part of the relationship building with the Ailey Company included them giving us access to these audio only interviews he conducted in the last year of his life. And that was extraordinary because there are absolutely stories he tells that are much more personal in there. And also there's just a quality of him. It's funny, it's similar to those Zora Neale Hurston images. There's a quality of the way that he is not, you know, it's not for press. So he's speaking in this very kind of casual, just relaxed, trusting way. And it's a kind of like, I've said this, you know, it's like he is embarking upon a journey of memory, and sort of he's almost transporting himself back. You feel in those tapes that he is no longer in the hotel room where he's working, or this voice is being recorded, but it is actually feels, you know, deep in his memory. And so sitting with that, it's about 20 hours, sitting with those tapes really kind of broke something open for us. It's just about the quality and texture that the film
well, yeah,
happen.
and so probably sort of like the openness, right? And that your guard is down and you really get to hear him through that, which is incredible.
Yeah. And there's, you know, it's interesting because it was also then a decision to like really, that became sort of the pillars for how we would build the story. And it also meant allowing him to tell the story he wanted to tell.
Yeah.
And so that meant there were places we could go, and there were other places that remained. You know, he is an extremely private person. And as much as he was revealing in those interviews, he also kept some things, you know, to himself. And I, you know, that's kind of an interesting part of the process of making this film too, to be guided by his voice and to allow him to you know, I'm making choices, but for him to speak to the things he wanted to speak to.
And you see that, I mean, you feel that you honored that. You're like, you wanted to make a film about this man who was incredible and give us a little bit more deeper history of who he was, but not like revealing secrets and trying to be like a gotcha, but really bringing out the, you know, who he, if he were alive, would be really proud of seeing this piece. So, you know, one of his most important pieces, of course, is Revelations, and just sort of, you know, giving people the opportunity to have that wash over us as well. How important is that? And for film in general, to bring pieces like this to a visual format for those who might not be able to make it to the theater and see something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself very lucky to have been able to see the Ailey Company live as often as I have and to have access to that. But I certainly don't come from like a family who was very sort of art centered in that way, or prioritizing that. And so, yeah, I think there is an interest in being able to showcase the dance works. It is extremely challenging because filming dance is so hard, and because you are editing the dance work, and because even whoever filmed it was choosing frames that edit the body, you were never having, you know, dance on film can never replicate the kind of proscenium stage unless we stay in that wide shot, in which you sort of lose something as well. So it's a very tricky thing of how to honor those dance works. But you know, Mr. Ailey was, and I share this belief too, he was as, you know, dedicated to his own work and to the work of the artists as he was to this idea of access, and the idea that art is not something that is only, you know, should only be available to people who have means and wealth, and should only be in like the grandest opera balls. And, you know, he just felt like art is available to everybody, and dance in particular, as his famous phrase, you know, dance came from the people and it should go back to the people. And so that idea of having a film that will hopefully have, you know, a broad reach means somebody can see Ailey, you know, in the theaters, or, you know, when it broadcasts on American Masters next year, and that'll be their in. And I think about that, you know, both in the way that I think Mr. Ailey has this incredible stumble upon with Katherine Dunham that completely opens himself up to possibilities. Then he's got a dance company, and George Faison and Miss Jamison and Sylvia Waters get to see him and have their moment of discovery. And I, you know, by, you know, the 90s, get to have this same experience, and how important that is. And how important that is that as many people as possible can get access to that. So centering Revelations as kind of his masterwork was very important. I think, you know, Blue Suite is the dance that shows, oh, he is a choreographer right. of note. And then Revelations is, oh, wow, you know, he's a genius. And so we wanted to give that dance its due, while also not letting Revelations like eclipse,
take over,
you know, everything, which is like a very tricky.
It's hard.
It's very hard. It's very hard. And there's so much to that. I mean, I Want to Be Ready, that solo. It's not in our film. Please go see the dance, or, you know, it's now available online through the Ailey Company. So there's so much more in that dance work that, you know, we just didn't have the time and space to create like a 30-minute Revelations in the middle of a film.
I'm sure you were probably like, oh, now it's this long. Let's just add one more. Can we just add one more? Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to do that. I think it's interesting that when you talk about Ailey, Mr. Ailey wanting to have his work accessible, he was also really open to sharing the stage and dance space for other people, and being a mentor and bringing people on and opening the door and not shutting it and not just being about him. I think that's an extraordinary, is it?
Yes, it is. I mean, he is the first, the Ailey Company is the first modern dance company that isn't only set on the works of the company founder, so that you will not find that Paul Taylor, Graham, Merce Cunningham, if you were a dancer in those companies, you were dancing that choreographer's work. And from the beginning, Mr. Ailey was sharing both his tours, so Tally Beatty's works are being performed by his company, Katherine Dunham is being performed by his company. I mean, he really was Pearl Primus. I mean, he very much was somebody who wanted to, you know, harness whatever power he had to show the dance works that came before, and to give a stage to, you know, innovative new dancers who were coming before him. It's interesting to think about. I mean, I do think it came from a place of real generosity. I think also it might have come from a place of, you know, I don't know, am I the best? You know, I don't, sometimes I wonder if it also came from a place of you know, potential doubt or insecurity. But whatever it was, I really think, and that's something that all the dancers will speak to, is just feeling like there is this space, and now this extraordinary space where you can come. You know, he just wasn't interested in you. He wasn't the center of it ever. And that is huge and foundational. And he kind of broke the mold in envisioning his enterprise in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's incredible that we got, and from that we got so many amazing choreographers, and that we're able to present and that we've been able to enjoy. So let me ask you, did you change? So from the beginning of shooting this documentary to the end of the documentary, how did it change your point of view? How did it change you? And did it change you as a person, as the way you looked at Alvin Ailey?
I don't know that it changed, you know, like in a total way, I think spending the time I got to spend with him and being alive to his world, to his kind of worldview and the way that he experienced the world, it changes me for that time period. I have to say, it's like I'm in the edit and I'm sort of trying my best to sort of channel his experience, and that means being alive to the world in ways too. Of, you know, I think this was true of a film I worked on about Walt Whitman as it is about Ailey. These are both people who are observers of their world. And so you start to kind of mimic that behavior. And I felt myself being maybe looking out more. But then, you know, the film ends and I go back to being me, which is whatever that is. I mean, I carry pieces of them with me. Yeah, it was very special. I mean, it'll be hard to kind of, I have to figure a way to sort of shed him to move on to the next thing, and letting go is always really challenging.
Well, you have created this incredible opportunity for people to experience Ailey in a way that they may not have understood him or know him. And I think that that's absolutely wonderful. And we have been really blessed to be able to share it with the Boston audience, where he is so loved in this space. And so I just want to thank you for that, and for all of the work that you're doing to lift up these voices and bring them forward. It's always so wonderful for us at Rox Film to be able to share these films with folks. And so, but without people like you, we wouldn't be able to do that. So I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. We're looking forward to anything you have coming up next. And yeah, I just thank you so much for all you're doing.
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel just very grateful. I feel like you can try to build a career, you know, I feel like I've been gifted just really extraordinary stories to sit with and to honor, and the kind of responsibility and joy in that has been just amazing. And so I'm so happy for everyone to be able to see this. I'm happy for people to see it in person. And yeah, all my love to Roxbury, because got much love for you. So
we'll take it. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.